Today we're going to start our first unit of our new distance learning course, which is talking about the Cold War. So we have just wrapped up talking about World War II and all of the results of World War II, and we're going to move into something called the Cold War. In order to really understand the Cold War, we have to understand communism, because the United States' fight against communism is going to be a huge contributing factor to the Cold War. And this Cold War is going to last for decades, decades upon decades following World War II. So we're going to go over a lot of different events that are related to the Cold War. And in order to fully understand that, we really have to know and understand the difference between communism and capitalism. So make sure that you've downloaded this assignment from Schoology that's called Communism versus Capitalism Assignment. I am going to go over this first part with you here that talks about the advantages and disadvantages of each of these two different types of systems and kind of what do we mean when we talk about one or the other. And you are going to be responsible for finishing page 2 and then submitting it to Schoology. So make sure you're following along. You answer through the chart at the top here, and then you complete the second page for your assignment. So if we get started here, what we're looking at is communism and capitalism. These are our unit learning goals. So remember, we always talk about these are the state standards that Minnesota says we need to learn. We will be able to compare and contrast capitalist and communist economic and political systems, which we're going to touch on today. And we will also be able to explain how differences between capitalist and communist systems contributed to the development of the Cold War. So today really is that overview of what is this political and economic belief system, and in part, why don't we like it? Because we have, in the United States, we have a capitalist system, and we are not going to like other communist systems or countries that have communism. And it's going to lead to a lot of conflict throughout the entire world because of these differences between the two systems. So to start with, what is communism versus what is capitalism? Communism is a system in which goods are owned in common and are available to all as needed, versus capitalism is a system based on private ownership and on investment of money in business in order to make a profit. The difference between these really has to do with ownership. Who owns what? In a capitalist system that we live in, the people own everything. So if you want to own your own home, you can buy a home and you can own it and it's yours. If you want to start your own business, you can start your own business. And if that business does well, great, you're going to make money. And if the business does not go well, then you're going to lose money or you might go bankrupt. So there are a lot more risks in a capitalist system, but there's also a lot more rewards. In a communist system, all goods essentially are owned in common, meaning that everybody collectively owns things together. Now, in reality, what that looks like is that the government owns everything and the government decides who gets what. Okay, many of these systems, when we look at what we call economic systems, we're looking at who gets what, who is going to get all of the goods that are available in that country. In communism, the government decides. So you don't own your own home, you don't own your own business. The government tells you where you're going to work, what you're going to make, how many of them you're going to make, and everything is controlled by the government. So there is no private ownership at all. Now, the initial push for communism was that everybody would be the same, that everyone would rise up. You can see this says the hand that will rule the world, one big union. The idea was, and the philosophy behind communism was that there would be no rich, there would be no poor, everyone would be equal, and everyone would work together for the same cause. Now, I'm not going to show you this video, but it is linked in your resources on your checklist, and I will post it on Schoology as well as a link. But it's important, again, to take note of what the philosophy of communism is versus the reality of it, which is why we're going to look at these benefits, advantages, and disadvantages to each one. Okay, so this is for your chart where you're going to identify, this is now looking at advantages. What is good about each economic system? For communism, one of the advantages is that everyone gets something. Everyone is equal. There's no rich, there's no poor, everyone is the same. So rather than some people being really wealthy and some people being poor, if the government is deciding who gets what, the government can distribute those things equally. So imagine if you were a poor person living in a communist country, you would like this idea that you might get to rise up and be equal to everyone else. And that certainly seems like an advantage. Another advantage of communism is there's no unemployment because the government is the one that's determining who does what. So the government finds jobs for everyone, has everyone working to a common goal. And again, a lot of people like the idea that the government will make sure that there is some form of employment for them. Communism, another advantage is that there's healthcare. Again, there's no private ownership here. There's no private health insurance companies. There's no private hospitals. Everything is open and available to everyone. So the idea is equality, that everyone gets treated the same, and that includes in healthcare. And then lastly, a big advantage of communism, at least in theory, the big advantage of communism is that there's a cooperation of the people. So you're not working to benefit yourself, you're working to benefit everyone. We even talked a little bit about this with fascism, the idea that you are not an individual, you are a member of this country, and what you do will benefit the country. It's a little bit similar to the idea of communism. You're not looking out to make millions of dollars and only thinking about yourself. You work because that work benefits your entire community. Now, in contrast to that, the benefits of capitalism. Remember, capitalism is where you can own your own property. So if you want to buy a house, if you want to buy a cabin, if you want to buy a brand new car, if you want to buy a vacation property down in Florida, you can do that in capitalism. You can buy whatever you can afford, and it belongs to you, and you can own it, you can sell it, you can distribute it however you want. Another advantage of capitalism is that you can prosper. You can work hard and your wages can go up. You can ask for raises. You can put in more time and more effort and end up becoming a wealthier individual. So your effort has a direct result, or at least in theory, if you work hard, you'll make more money. That's one of the advantages of capitalism. In communism, if you work hard, you're still going to be the same as everyone else. Okay, so in capitalism, the idea is the more you work, the more money you're going to make and the more benefits you get then in society. In capitalism, one of the benefits is also freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion. What we often see in communist societies is that those things don't exist, but in capitalist ones, they do. We don't have to worry about people speaking out against government control in our lives because there isn't as much government control in our lives. So we're able to give people those freedoms. Another advantage of capitalism is that oftentimes countries embrace ethnic diversity. So it's not about everybody being equal, it's about providing the same opportunities or similar opportunities for everyone, but it doesn't matter if you're different, you would still fit in. Or at least, hopefully you would. Again, these are all ideal. They may not happen in practice, but they're what we hope will happen in these systems. And then lastly, it makes individual work worth something. So you're not going to just have to rely on the government to give you everything. It values the fact that you need to work in order to prosper. And a lot of people find that important, that you need to show that you are putting in effort in order to get what you earn versus the government just giving you a handout. Now, the disadvantages, again, you're going to fill this in on your chart under disadvantages of each economic system, because often what we're talking about these disadvantages, because oftentimes what in theory sounds like a good idea doesn't actually happen within countries in practice. So in communism, for example, what we see is a huge abuse of power. We talked about Joseph Stalin when we talked about the start of World War II. Stalin was a communist dictator of the Soviet Union, and there was a ton of abuse of power. Restrictions like no freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, no religious practices. There's a lot of control that the government wants to have over your lives, and they can't afford for you to have rights or opinions about how the government is controlling you, which means there's also a ton of censorship. If you look at the Soviet Union throughout this time and other communist countries, the government is going to control newspapers, the government is going to control the information you receive, so you're only getting information from the government. The government then also owns property. You could not own property yourself, so you are dependent on the government to give you what you need. And one of the big criticisms of communism is that since individuals don't compete, there's no motivation for you to work harder. So in some ways, you have no reason to really strive or do better or be innovative or creative or come up with new ideas because there's no benefit to you in doing that. One of the advantages of capitalism is that people are creative and they come up with new solutions and new products and new businesses because by doing that, they actually make more money and they do better in society. And communism, why? Why bother? Why bother coming up with new ideas if the government is going to just tell you what you do and how much money you have and what house you're going to live in? Now, that does not mean capitalism is perfect. Capitalism often results in poverty because you've got a big divide between rich and poor. If you look at that last bullet point, it says it creates inequalities, the rich versus poor, haves versus have-nots. And that is certainly true in capitalism. Even if you look at the United States, we've got a small percentage of people who make millions and billions of dollars in the US, and we have a really high percentage of people in this country who live in poverty. And there are a lot of factors that go into it as far as what creates poverty. But unlike communism, there isn't the set standard of everybody is equal. Also in capitalism, not everyone has health care. So there's no guarantee, there's no government health care, there's no system of health insurance that's covered by the government. And again, that leads to this haves versus have-nots. Some people are going to get that health care and lead healthy lives, and other people are not going to get it with often bad consequences. And then lastly, one of the other things we see in capitalism are monopolies, which is companies that are controlling too much of that particular business. So we see very small numbers of individuals who control the economy and their businesses control the economy, and they make tons and tons and tons of money while it makes it really difficult for other people to do the same. So there are certainly advantages of both of these systems. Again, many of those advantages are reality, but many of those advantages were, in theory, this is what we had hoped would come out of this system. And there are also a lot of disadvantages, and we see those disadvantages in practice. What we're going to see is that the United States is going to have strong opposition to communism spreading throughout the rest of the world, especially because of the disadvantages you see on this page: abuse of power, restrictions of freedoms, government control. And we're going to want to promote capitalism and democracy in the rest of the world. And the Soviet Union is going to want to promote communism. And so that's going to lead us to come to some head-to-head conflicts as we go throughout the 1950s and 1960s. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and then continually check Schoology. I will be posting office hours or when I will be available actively on my computer, but I will be on my computer most days and will be able to answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, complete page 2 of your assignment. Look at additional resources if you need to help you better understand, and then check back in and kind of move on. Our next lesson will be going through what are some of these early events of the Cold War. Talk to you guys soon.